how interchangeable are some of those skills? So like when you're talking about nurses or some of the medical stuff, it's a very specific skill that you need to absolutely know how to do like these specific things. And if you know it though, you're probably going to be able to do your job. Whereas probably a lot of other jobs are more, I guess you would call soft skills, more social skills, things like that, where the skills aren't necessarily as defined, what it takes to be good at the job.
Well, I live in the world of soft skills. If you were going to kind of put where my world is, I definitely am doing the AI and the data analysis, but really it's thinking about interpersonal relationships at work. And so there's a lot of soft skills there. But you use nurses or doctors as an example, but actually what we find in terms of lawsuits filed against them for malpractice is having those soft skills can be night and day in terms of the percentages of people who are sued malpractice issues. So same event might happen, but how it's handled, right?
I've
So
heard that.
one is a very technical thing, but there's the communication, there's the empathy, there's all of those sorts of things, and the way they present themselves, how open they are, that can make a huge factor difference, for that hospital, obviously, and then the individuals. So, if you're really good at finance and investing, what's going to happen to you in 5 to 10 years as an individual contributor is you're going to be promoted to be a manager and manage other people. So even if you don't come out right away as somebody who's going to manage other people, I think we quickly slot people into that area if they're good at their job, which is kind of ironic, right? We don't often give them the support or training for that, but we assume because they're good engineers or because they're good at finance, they must be good at leading other people in those jobs. So we look at the
Mhm.
skill part, but not the soft skills part. Even
Yeah.
pretty big organizations fall prey to that.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get to that after. I want to talk about the selection process first because we're talking about soft skills don't really come up on a resume. And I guess, as you were saying, I guess not actually most people don't get hired based on the resume. They do get hired based on some personal connection. But when we're talking about fitting and how people are match to their job and how well they can do their job and all these things. How good are most companies at that selection process? You mentioned one thing that was sort of an undervalued skill that people have. Are there more things that you think are maybe overvalued versus undervalued when we're evaluating new people that we hire?
Yeah. Well, in the States, we tend to really value people who come across as confident, competent. We conflate competence with confidence. And so if somebody's extroverted, if, they're able to present themselves well, we tend to have this positive halo. They must be good at everything. The research doesn't necessarily bear that out because, as you might imagine, that's everyone who's extroverted, and it doesn't really say anything about their skill set. So more introverted people can definitely be great thinkers. They can be great, have a lot to contribute, but it's just packaged a little bit differently. So the research is really clear that interviews can be really effective, but not the shooting from the hip. I'm just going to shoot the breeze with you. What works really well is having structured interviews. So everybody's asked the exact same questions, a panel. So multiple people are rating against the criteria that was established. And when you kind of have the discipline to do those things, that leads to much better outcomes, in terms of what you're looking for. And then it's up to the organization to say, do they think that it's important, some of these soft skills, or that there are examples of where they've demonstrated leadership or dealt with conflict. And so there's a lot of situational interview questions you can ask to get at those. And that's what I'm always looking at when I'm interviewing somebody. Have they engaged in things or situations demonstrating skills that I think are going to be needed in this job? I've also done work with organizations who are doing initial interviews. AI is scoring those interviews. You just record, upload, they get scored. There may be bias built in, but it's not human bias directly. And again, that's a filtering, funneling process. That's not making final decisions, but thousands of people apply, and so which hundreds are going to get through might be scored by AI based on what people are saying.
It's just a tool, and you can use it well or you can use it poorly, right? And I was
But
wondering
what was
too.
interesting about that research actually was I expected that people wouldn't be open to it, that they would feel like it was kind of a cold thing having a computer score them. They actually found it, this is during COVID, so that might have been part of it, but they really appreciated that approach and the flexibility. So that was interesting. And the ability, in this particular instance, the organization allowed them to record multiple and just submit the one that they wanted to. And so they really liked that quite a bit.
Mhm. And I was wondering, so a lot of if you're looking at a job description posting, they'll have pretty specific requirements, things that they're looking for. Because I feel like that's there people look for one really specific, like, or like a few really specific things that they focus on, and it's just like they're not the most critical things for the job. It's just that we need something concrete to, hone in on.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there are some that are better than others. Discrimination is bad. Discriminating is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to discriminate from someone who can do this job well from someone who can't, right? That's the good kind of discriminate. But discrimination, can be illegal, unethical, all of those things. So I think one of the things is that discipline is, required by law, that you have criteria, that you show what those are, so we avoid that bad kind of discrimination, right? This idea
Okay.
that, we can't consider you unless you have these things, but if you're in that universe, then you will be considered. So I think that first pass is where that comes from. Now, what those criteria are, I think, was a key part of what you were asking. And so, I think sometimes organizations just get in habits of saying the same thing they've said last time, and not really thinking about the job. But it's not glamorous work, but going back, doing a job analysis, really understanding what it takes to be good at this job. But again, there's a lot of things in flux. And so, at Google, they're not even hiring for jobs. There aren't job descriptions. So it's kind of good for Google. And then you don't even know what job you might be placed in until you get there. At least that was the case when I was there. And so that's a new way of thinking about things altogether, right? So there you're thinking about what kind of person are you, how smart, how flexible, how creative, what kind of skills have you done, what experiences you had. It's a different animal altogether in a way than thinking about a specific job. But I think in some ways it was pretty insightful because jobs will evolve and people don't stay in the same job for their whole careers normally. So
To go with the diversity sort of line, I imagine for a lot of jobs, you do want just a diverse background. You have a job description, maybe you have a bunch of people doing this job, but you don't want one kind of person doing that job, right? You probably want a bunch of different people, especially on more creative jobs where you're just innovating. I'm sure that's a valuable thing, right?
yeah, oh, absolutely. And I mean, even I've got research looking at retail employees selling clothes, and people who have kind of more skills, even though they're not directly related to that, tend to sell more. I mean, there's kind of, this kind of general truism that people who have kind of higher cognitive ability tend to be better at most jobs. So even though we wouldn't think of that as a job that would require a lot of creativity, I think clearly something is driving that difference. And, it might be the creative way in which they approach people or think about sales strategies, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think you're right.
This is kind of a general question, but like, how much time, effort do companies spend evaluating performance, and how do they do that in softer skills? And because these are all hard to quantify, but like also important and not obvious from just looking at data. So I was wondering, like you've worked at a few companies, but I wonder what your impression is of how good companies are at managing people and getting the most out of them, basically.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting, important question. Again, really changing what we had always been done seemed a little broken. So, historically, there was the annual performance appraisal, and we'd have to try and remember everything that happened in the last year. That goes kind of against all the best practices, what we know about, people's performance and feedback and relationships. And so, now it's a lot more about one-on-ones, and we see that more often. People have more frequent one-on-ones, and then those once a year formal things have become less and less critical. But on the other hand, we're still trying to decide who to promote and who to move around. Big organizations like the Microsofts, the Googles, the IBMs, they're going to have internal almost job fairs, right? They're going to be talking about other jobs where people can have the opportunity to move around. There's a lot of strategies around, looking for all sorts of different people. And so it depends on how large the organization is. If you're at a startup, obviously you get to kind of get your hands on anything, and the job is expanding daily, weekly, monthly, and so there's a lot of opportunities, and people can learn a lot in a short amount of time there. So there's kind of pros and cons to big organizations or smaller organizations, and how much room there is for you to really kind of put your fingerprint on things.
Well put. what are some of the costs of choosing the wrong person for the job? Somebody who either doesn't fit well or somebody who's not going to be happy and quits. Because I've heard like the process of onboarding and then as well as the training and all these things can be many times even just the salary of the person. So it's a really important thing, right?
Exactly. No, it is. So, obviously it depends on the estimate, but there's a lot of money involved in that. There's the opportunity cost because the work isn't getting done. There's a morale cost when people
Mhm.
don't work out within. And then there's a culture. I think the worst is they're a bad hire and they stay, right? I mean, turnover is not the worst outcome there. That would be great compared to them staying, having a bad attitude. Kind of, you bring enough people in, and eventually the culture is going to shift. Into something else compared to what it was. And so I think it's really something to look to and think about because at 1% at a time, it doesn't seem like much, but it really adds up to that becomes your culture. Is it something where people are passionate, engaged, or is it kind of, what's in it for me? And I'm going to do the minimum and, kind of coast here.